Hello and welcome to yet another Outwardly experience. Today we'll be talking about how to make a login/registration page for your server. For that, you obviously need a client-side script and a server-side script, as well as an HTML page. First of all, I'm gonna try to make you understand how the flow of control works when there's a log or registration page. So I made a flowchart over here. So here's how it goes. First thing, we make an HTML page, okay? An HTML page. Then we have a client-side script where we make a CEF. Now, here where the things get complicated. From the server, when a player connects, you want to trigger the client event for that player. And when you trigger the client event, in the client side, you need to activate the CEF, you need to show the cursor, you need to disable the chat, and you need to freeze the player. Once you have done that, the HTML web page, the login page, will be shown as a CEF, as in Chrome Embedded Framework. Then you have to give an HTML input, as in the password or double password for confirmation when you registration or for login, whatever. Then you're going to check in the HTML itself with the help of JavaScript or jQuery that if there is any input or not. If there is no input, then you're going to show an error that there needs to be an input, and then you're going to go back to the input page. Then again you're going to check when the login button is pressed if there was any input or not. Let's say now that the input was given, we will trigger a client event from the HTML. From HTML we're going to trigger a client event, then it goes to the client side. In the client side, we're going to trigger a remote event to the server. Then when the server catches the information, from there we're going to check the password with the help of SQL query or however you have stored your password. Then from the server, we are going to check if the password is correct or not. If the password is not correct, then we are going to go back to the client side to show the CEF, the login page HTML, that the password is wrong. However, if the server password checks and it's correct, then you are going to give a server-sided function to trigger a client event, and you are going to disable the CEF, remove the cursor, enable the chat, and unfreeze the player, as well as you're going to log in the player. So this is the basic gist, basic control flow of how the login or registration takes place. Now we will actually make the login.html. Just give me a second while I load my project. Okay, now to make the HTML page, first of all, you need to place it in your RageMP root folder, server files, client packages, and right over here, or you can keep it inside a folder, but for now I'm gonna keep it over here. Create a new text file, make it as, I'll just make it login, and I'll change the extension to HTML. I'll open this with my Visual Studio Code. And here we go. Now, if you have any idea about how to make HTML code, CSS, HTML language knowledge, CSS knowledge, JavaScript knowledge, and it's better but optional if you have Bootstrap and jQuery. But I'll make the most basic login page and I'll show it to you. Give me one moment. Now, this is the most basic login page, HTML page that I could come up with without Bootstrap, without anything tedious. This is just basic HTML and CSS. It's just a welcome form, a border, a password text box, and a login submit button. Now, what we need over here is a script. So what we're gonna do is we're going to write script. There we go. Now, inside script, we will write whatever should happen, what event should be triggered once any button or something happens. So let me just quickly pause it and I'll show it to you. Alright, so far we have done this in the JavaScript using jQuery. What happens is once the document is ready, we will check if the login button is clicked. If it does get clicked, this login button does get clicked, then the function will happen. It will check that if password text, which is the ID for this password text field, if this password text value is empty, then it is going to show, it's going to check this alert text, which is this small ID, and it will change the text to password cannot be empty. I'll show it to you. It's going to be for a split second, so keep an eye out. See that? It won't change in the actual game. Right now it's changing because it's trying to post somewhere. That's not a problem. Now, what if the password text does contain a value? Well, it should trigger a client event. So mp dot trigger. We will write a client event, so I'll just do it login info to client, and I'll send a parameter which will be the password text. So using jQuery, password text dot val, there we go. So if there is no password text in the text field, the value is nothing, then it's just going to prompt that the password cannot be empty. However, if there is any sort of value, then this will be triggered. Okay, now we will make one slight adjustment. We will make a function so that if the password is incorrect, then we can prompt something else as well. So we'll make a function uh, invalid password, and we will use jQuery again. Small, oops, it's alert text. Alert text. The text is equals to invalid password. This is not needed for now, but we will see in a moment. Now from this CEF HTML, we are triggering it to the client side. So let's get to the client side. Now keep in mind that the client side script needs to be in a .cs form extension, and it should be under server files, client packages, cs underscore packages, and if you want, you can keep it under another folder. And here is my .cs. So I've already opened it, and I have already exported using Rage, and I have inherited the events.script class. So now we will make our constructor public main, and in the main we are going to add an event. No, before we add an event, let's make a CEF first. So rage.ui.html window, and we will name this as login CEF is equals to null, and in the constructor we will actually create an object. So login CEF is equals to new, there we go. Inside the parameter for this object, we need to give the path for the HTML file. Now the path for the HTML file is written as follows. Packages, this client packages, we will write it as pa package colon slash slash, and wherever your HTML file is located, you will refer it to there. So since it's in my root folder of CS packages, as you can see, client packages, it's in the root folder, so I won't give any more directory. I'll just write login.html. and my login CEF is done. It's created. Now we will make an event, add an event, and the name of the event will be this trigger that happens from the HTML. The name of the event is login info to client. So I'll copy that and I'll make an events the add, and once if this is invoked, which function should be called is what I'll write. So the function will be login info to client. The function that I'll call is send login info to server. Now let's make a callback function for that. So public void send login info to server, and the parameters should be object array args. Now over here what should happen is once the information is transferred from the HTML file to the client side, we need to send this information from the client side to the server side. So let me first open my server side package. Give me a moment. Okay, now I have my server side script on, and you can see that I'm using GTA Network API. I have inherited the script. What we will do is we are going to create a remote event first. So let's create a remote event, and the name of this remote event will be login info from client. We will make a callback public void login info from client, and the parameters should be client player, and the second parameter should be the password, which is retrieved from the HTML file. So it will be a string password, and we will invoke this remote event from the client side. So over here we are going to do rage dot events dot client, wait, wrong one, events dot call remote, and over here we're going to write the name of the event. In our case, the name of the event is login info from client, which is written in our server. So I'll copy this and I'll paste it in our client script, login info from client, and we are going to pass the parameter. In this case, the parameter is args1, the index 0, because the index of an array starts from 0, and we will explicitly typecast it to string, so args 0. And that is how the control is going from HTML to client to server. Now in our server, this function, this remote event gets invoked, and this function gets invoked. So right now I won't actually check if there is a password or not. I will only check that if the password that the player sends is equals to the name, is equal to their name. So what I'll do is if password the equals player the name, else this means that the password was wrong. This is that the password was true. Now before we do anything, we will make a server event. Server event the player connected. Let's make a callback for this, public void on player connected client player. Oh, that's all we need. Now, what should happen when a player connects? When a player connects, we need to show them the CEF. So we need, from the server, we need to trigger a client event. So let's do that. We will trigger napi dot client event dot trigger client event, and player, this is the uh, this for this player the client event will trigger, and the name of the event, so we will name this show CEF, and we will pass an argument true. I'll tell you why we're passing true. Now this will trigger a client event, so let's get back to our client side script. We will add this client event which was named show CEF, so we will copy it and we will add an event in our constructor events.add, and I'll paste it show CEF. And when show CEF is invoked from the server, which function should be executed? Let's just do show login page. This function should be executed. Let's make the callback for this, public void show login page, and the parameters will be obviously object args. Now when show login page executes, there are four things that we need to do. We need to show the player the login CEF, we need to enable the mouse cursor, we need to disable the chat option, and we need to freeze the player. So let's do that. Okay, so login CEF dot active is equals to true. Oh wait, no, we will rather do a bool flag, and we will typecast this to bool, and in our arguments where we passed over here this is true, it will be passed in our object args, which will be in the first index, so we will typecast that as bool. The first index contains that true, and we're typecasting it to bool, and it is getting saved in flag. So now we will use this only. So login cef.active is equals to flag. So the active is getting true because from the server right now we are passing true. Then we are going to show the mouse cursor. So rage.ui.cursor dot visible is equals to flag. Now we need to disable the chat option. So chat dot show would be the opposite. If the parameter is true, the show should be false. If the parameter is false, the show should be true. So we will give an exclamation mark, which means the opposite of a boolean, and flag. And last but not the least, what we need to do is we need to freeze the player so that they do not move when they're trying to type anything. So rage dot I think it was in elements the player the local player dot freeze position and flag. There we go. So let's do a recap. When a player connects, when a player does connect, they will trigger the player will trigger a client event of show CEF. So we'll go to the client side. This is our show CEF, which will trigger the function show login page. And in our show login page, what we're doing is we're extracting the parameter which was true from the server. We saved it in flag, and we are activating the CEF, we are activating the cursor, we are disabling the chat, and we are freezing the player. Now, once this is done, this part will show the HTML part, the HTML page that we just created. So this will be shown. Then let's say the player hits the login button, which is done over here, login button dot click. So if they hit it and the password text is nothing, then they will get a prompt that the password cannot be empty. However, if there is anything at all, then this will be triggered. So from the login HTML page, we will head back to the client side script, which is login info to client. So if login info to client is invoked, the function send login info to server gets invoked, which will invoke another call remote function to the server, which is login info from client. So let's go back to login in our server, login info from client. Over here, we are going to check if the password is equals to the name of the player or not. You can change this to the password from the SQL server, completely up to you. So if it is equals, what we are going to do is we are going to disable the CEF and we are going to unfreeze the player. We can simply do this by taking this and making the parameter as false. So if the password is equals to name of the player, then the client trigger event will trigger show CEF and the parameter will be false. Show CEF will trigger show login page, and show login page the parameter args will have false. So login CEF.active will be false. So the web page, the HTML page, will get disabled. The cursor will become false, so the cursor will get disabled. Chat.show is false, but this exclamation mark makes it the opposite, so it becomes true. So now the player can use the chat function, and freeze position becomes false. That means the player can now move freely. Okay, now the last thing. What happens if the password is incorrect? If the password is incorrect, what we are going to do is we are going to call another client event, trigger client event, player, and we will invoke an event name, let's say invalid password. That's all we need. We will not send any parameters for this. In our client side, we will add another event, events.add. Now the name of the event was, what was it? Invalid password. So invalid password. If the event name invalid password gets invoked from the server, the function that we will execute is invalid password. Let's make a callback function for this. Public void invalid password. The parameters will be object args. Now, over here what we are going to do is we are going to execute a JavaScript. So login cef dot execute.js, and inside execute.js we are going to pass the parameter the name of the function which is inside our HTML page. In this case, the name of the function is invalid password. If we invoke this function, what happens is that the alert text, this part, will print that it has an invalid password. I hope that makes sense. We are going to pass that. The name was invalid password, so invalid password and the bracket. There we go. Now we are completely set. Now let me run the server and we will test it. Okay, now here we are in game. Now I'll be honest, this login thing looks pretty shitty. Well, you can make your own using Bootstrap and jQuery. You can make whatever you want. CSS. It is completely up to you, but this is the most basic one that I could think of. Over here you can see that it's written please enter your password. So I'll write a wrong password and it's written invalid password. Now there's nothing written over here. I'll try to log in and it says password cannot be empty. Now I'll actually write the correct one, which is my name, and I'll log in and you can see the CEF disappeared and I can move back again. And that is how you create a login HTML page to show in your server. So I'll give a recap. From your server on Player Connect, you need to trigger a client event. From client event, you need to create a login CEF, and then show that log in CEF. When an input is made in the CEF, you need to give a response to the client side via a trigger, and then from the client side, you need to call remote function to the server. In the server, you need to check if the password is correct or not, and accordingly, you need to send back a trigger to the client side, and then again back to the HTML page. Seems quite hectic, but if you play with it a little, you'll be able to understand it perfectly. So practice, practice, and practice. And I'll see you next time then. Peace.